is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. Confucius said that. If your team falls and fails, the whole project can fail, but that does not have to be what happens. Today, I'm going to talk to you about some research, 3 research studies that will help you to know how you can make your team resilient. I'm also going to give you an example of a team that showed resilience. And I'm going to talk about an example where there absolutely was no resilience in this entire episode. How many of you believe that social support is important when it comes to having a team to be resilient? Raise your hands. Well, you would be correct. That's absolutely right. A research study was done that involved 275 teams. This was from 52 small and medium-sized Spanish enterprises. And what they found was that 2 things were important when it comes to resilience. It's important that you have an atmosphere of support for that team. It's also important that there's coordination mechanisms in place that help that team to be effective. There were 2 other research studies that were done that I think are really important. These were done by a team of researchers from a number of different universities. They were from the University of Michigan, from Tel Aviv University, from Case Western Reserve University, and Boston University. They found that an individual is a lot more likely to be forgiving if that person or a lot more likely to be forgiving if they have the fortitude and the strength to learn from the hurt caused by another. People who are forgiving are a lot more likely to get over disappointments and failure, and they're a lot less likely to hold grudges. Resilience is what helps people to be able to overlook people's mistakes and move forward. These researchers found a link between resilience and relationships. Not only that, but they discovered a key that made these kinds of relationships possible. This key is a concept that's called emotional carrying capacity. This is really what's at the heart of it. There's 3 aspects of emotional carrying capacity. It's about the freedom to express more emotion overall. It's about the ability to express both positive and negative emotion, and it's also about being able to express those emotions constructively. That's very important. There were 2 studies that they did. One involved individual relationships, and the other involved team relationships. One of these studies involved people, employees of a large university, and the other involved top management teams at 500 Israeli firms. Both of these studies provided very strong evidence for this concept I'm talking about, emotional carrying capacity. That's really what facilitates these kinds of relationships that allow a team to be resilient. Of course, you have to have an open environment, a safe environment where the team members, where they feel comfortable to be able to share honestly with each other. In other words, every team member has to feel like the others will understand and respond to their needs and concerns. That's just crucial. Otherwise, I mean, people are not going to do this. If you want your team to be resilient and to be able to overcome obstacles, you're going to be interested in the rest of what I have to say today. I'm going to now give you an example of team resilience that actually happened. This happened at Cincinnati Millicron. This is a company that makes equipment. They make grinding machines and numerical control machines and also plastic injection molding machines. They were founded in 1884. This happened along about 1985. At that time, there were about 15 plastic injection molding companies in the United States, but before the end of the decade, there were only 5. So it's a very competitive, very tough industry. Another thing is foreign competitors had taken over half of the market. And so Cincinnati Millicron, their sales were dropping. They said, we've got to do something about this. So they decided to redo their product, the plastic injection molding machines. And what they did is that the regional sales manager named Kozak got together with a product manager, Harold Fay, and they figured out, they got on the board and they figured out exactly what the specifications of a new machine would have to be in order to beat the competition. It turned out that the machine was going to have to cost 40% less than what their current machine cost. It was going to have 40% more functionality, and they were going to have to be able to get it produced in half the time. These are very big goals. This is asking a lot. They formed a team. They added 10 more people to their team, and they started to work on it. One of the first things they did is that they looked at competitor products, and they looked at rival machines, and they discovered that the rival machines, when the customer wanted it, they could get it the next day, whereas Cincinnati Millicron, it would take months to order it. They found out that the competitor machines were often cost 40% less. This wasn't good. And their machine had a whole bunch of other features that nobody cared about, they didn't use. So they learned a lot by going to customers and finding out what was going on. They became very motivated, and they decided, well, what we're going to do is bring everybody that's working on this, it was an interdisciplinary team, and bring all 10 together in the same place, so the offices were next to each other, so they could really work on this, which they did. This was a whole different way of working where they were able to interact closely with each other that way. But the day came when they came up with a prototype. They had 270 days to do this. So it was called Project 270. Well, the day arrived, and the boss, Harold Fay, was going to present this at an Atlanta trade show. But what happened was Ethel, her name was Ethel, and she discovered that she was a cost accountant. She discovered, hey, it's only saving us 35%. We're only knocking 35% off. Well, she knew the goal was 40. She faced a dilemma. Did she tell her boss? Did she tell Fag about this? I mean, after all, it was better than the previous machine, and it's close to 40%. What did she do? She decided to go ahead and tell him. Well, turned out he did have the emotional carrying capacity to be able to handle this bad news. Then he told his team about this, and what did they do? They were very resilient. They shaved off another 5%, cut the cost by another 5%, and they met their deadline. They had until December 12, and actually they were able to put this new machine out there on December 7th at their Batavia plant. They had a big party with cigars and cake. And this plant had actually been, their business had been dwindling, they were almost idle. But when this new machine came along, they were cranking these out at 2.5 times the rate of their best previous machine. So this was a huge success. Not only that, but this new way they had found of working together, concurrent engineering, is a method that they used to revamp many of their other product lines. So this truly was a win-win. Now, I want you to really contrast this with this next example. This is an example where this team just simply, they just went from one situation to another. They have more money than you can even conceive of, just constantly coming in. They had a lot of internal strife. They faced legislative threats, and they never did show resilience. The company I'm talking about is Napster. How many of you have heard of Napster or know of it? It was a company, internet company from the late 1990s. This company got started when a young man named Sean Fanning came up with some computer code for file sharing. Then his uncle found out about it. His name was John Fanning, and he looked at this and he thought about it, wow, this could be a basis for a company. So he decided to take Sean's project and turn it into a business. He told Sean, I'm going to have to do a lot of business activities to make this happen. And so I want 70% of the company and I'll give you 30%. Sign this and here we go. So Sean thought, well, I don't know if that's right or not, but okay. So he agreed to it. John formed a corporation and then started going for funding. Not even 2 months went by when he brought in $250,000 for this brand new startup. But the catch to it was, there was a condition, and that was that they had to bring in a CEO, someone who could help them and that was knowledgeable about this type of a business. They brought in Eileen Richardson. She had experience running a technology-based web company, and she was a venture capitalist, so she was perfect for this job. Well, her job most of the time was to keep bringing more money in because they weren't making any money, and so they constantly were in need of new investors. She had the idea from the beginning that this company would be, a great thing for it to do would be to serve as a platform for new artists, to get the new artist song offerings out there. But it turned out that the major activity of Napster was music sharing. The way this worked was Napster, it was kind of like a switchboard. In other words, if you went to the Napster website and you wanted a particular piece of music, their website would find somebody out there in Webland and match you up with them. Then they would go away and then you'd be able to complete the transaction without Napster. And a lot of people, of course, found this service to be very desirable. It seemed great. The idea that Napster had behind this was that once we get enough users, enough followers, then we'll be able to go to a music company and a record company and do some kind of a deal for sharing in the profits from this. Well, what happened was that, well, they did get, some experts say they got as many as 40 million users, and some even thought it could have been as much as 70 million. A lot of people that were using this service. And they thought that they could get away with copyright infringement because they went away when people were actually completing this transaction, each one of them, and because they were not making any profits of them already for selling customers new music. They already had this worked out. And this is what Richardson had wanted all along. What happened was that if they had gone through with this merger, then 2/3 of the new stock would have belonged to Napster. This would have meant that Kleiner would have immediately put in $15 million. They would have had the Kleiner stamp of approval, which is huge. Go from being completely illegitimate to a legitimate business. But guess what happened? Oh, I was going to tell you also, if they had been able to do this, Napster's part of this deal would have been valued at $100 million. Not bad for only being around for 6 months and having under 30 employees. Wow. But guess what? John Fanning, guess what he did? He disagreed, he would not agree to this merger. Well, finally he did. But then an hour later he reneged. Terrible, terrible. Hard to believe that this happened. And then after this, well, the stock market started going down and down. When the stock market goes down, it's impossible to do a stock deal like this. I mean, nobody could do it. And eventually, Napster just went up in flames. We all know that certainly it is possible to have a business selling music on the web because we have iTunes. Napster, in fact, when they did at one point offer record companies a deal, but what they offered was so minuscule that it was laughable. So of course the record companies would not do it. Greed got the better of Napster. And it's also true that this company never did show any resilience. That meant their team failed. What does it take for a team to have resilience? Probably the most important thing is to have an environment that's supportive of flexibility and trying new things, where there's an action orientation. It's also important that you have a team that can take advantage of this key ingredient called emotional carrying capacity. This means that team members are able to constructively express both positive and negative emotions. It's important to pick people to be on your team that are capable of emotional carrying capacity, or at least accepting it. Research shows that there's two things that are important. It's important to have an environment that's supportive for teamwork and to have resilience, and it's also important to have proper coordinating mechanisms. Relationships are key to all this. And I gave you the example about how the team at Cincinnati Millicron was resilient even under extreme time pressure. And then I gave you the example about what happened at Napster, which showed that no amount of opportunity could make up for a lack of good relationships and therefore a lack of resilience. If you want your team to be successful, then pay attention, because if you have good relationships on your team, that team will also be able to be resilient. This means, remember, a team that can be resilient is a team that, after